again, my little yarnivores and spiderettes and arachnids. Fiber Spider back again with another tutorial just for you. And today we've got ourselves a lovely little stitch. This is the bee stitch. Yep. It's got a lovely squishy little texture. It's very simple with only a 4-row repeat. 2 of the rows are just knits all the way across, and the other 2 rows out of the 4-row repeat, they are essentially the same with a slight offset to create this beautiful staggered pattern, and it kind of looks like itty-bitty little bees. And the back side actually makes me think of a honeycomb. You know, it's so gorgeous. Now, even though we are predominantly working with knit stitches, it does have a tendency to curl on the sides, sort of like the stockinette stitch. So I would suggest perhaps doing a border around your piece. I didn't. I wanted to see how it would work up without a border. So gives you an idea what it would be like if you didn't have a border. Now, for this particular piece, I used Lion Brand's Pound of Love, which is sort of a thinnish weight of 4. So I used a size 9 knitting needle right here. Let me see, what is the millimeter? So this is, sorry, where is that little number? Oh, there it is. Okay, so this is a 5.5 millimeter, size 9. Today, however, I'm going to be using a slightly more robust yarn and a size 10. And is this a size 10 and a half? Yes, this is a 10 and a half, 6.5 millimeter knitting needle. And I'm going to be using Red Heart Super Saver Ombre. And yeah, you know what? Without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Okay. Okie dokie. So we're going to start with our cast on here. Now, for those of you who've been following my knitting videos, you know that I love the knitted cast on. It is one of my favorites because it is fairly stretchy and works up very nicely, and you don't have to worry about the long tail cast on where it's like, do I have enough yarn for my cast on? So for the knitted cast on, you cast on your slip stitch there, and then going to proceed by knitting each stitch on. So as if normal, doing a knit stitch, pull up that loop, going around and in, and then pull that loop. So now I've got 2 stitches going in as if to knit that stitch up and pull that loop up and twist and in. There you go. That's a 3rd one. And as far as the number of stitches that you need cast on for this particular pattern, well, all you need is an odd number. Can be whatever width you want as long as it's an odd number. And so I think today we're going to do, I don't know, maybe 13 or 11, something short and sweet. And if you were to do a border, I would suggest adding on an additional maybe 5 stitches on each side prior to you actually working the pattern, and then just knit those stitches at the beginning and end of each row to create a garter stitch border. Before doing the actual patterning, I would say do, maybe half an inch or so of just garter stitch, just knit every row. And then when you're ready to do the pattern, knit those border stitches, then start in on the actual patterning. And so, yeah, I'm just going to do maybe 11 or 13 stitches in total, and then we can get started. So I'd say I've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 already. Okay, let's just do 3 more. and then we can get started with row 1. And if you would like a more in-depth look at how to do the knitted cast on, I do have a video on that. So I'm going to put a link to that in the description box down below. So do I have my 13? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 13. Perfect. Okay, let us commence with row 1. Okay, row 1. Very, very simple. It's just all knit stitches. And I will do row 1 with you. However, when we get to row 3, I think I might just do it off camera. But yeah, just go in to each stitch, knitting each stitch. Really, really quite simple. Gives you a little bit of a break every other row from having to do any sort of thinking about the pattern. And the pattern, really not that difficult, but it's nice to have a bit of a respite. Now, the reason why we're starting off with a knitted row is because it's going to set us up for doing our pattern. Gives us a bit of a foundation to work off of. And because we're going to be knitting in stitches below, we're going to need this row. Okay, just a few more. And there we go. Now, like I said, of course, you can cast on and knit as many stitches as you want for your desired width, but I'm just keeping it nice and simple for a little swatch for us so that you can get used to how the pattern works up. All right, so that is row 1. Okay, row 2 is where the fun begins. All right, so for row 2, being careful to work with our working yarn, not our tail yarn. The first stitch, well, just knit that first stitch. If you have a border, knit those stitches first, and then knit 1 stitch. Then the second stitch, we're going to be knitting into the stitch below. All right, so instead of knitting into this stitch, we're going to knit into that little space below that sort of horizontal bar. So knitting down here, okay? And sometimes it helps if you sort of stretch the work open a little bit, and you can pop your needle right into that space down below. So it looks like you're almost going into 2 stitches there. Then knit as normal. So yarn around, and then being careful, you pull up that loop. See, I missed a ply already, so I'm going to do that again. That's okay. If you're working with a yarn that splits, take extra special care. So I'm going to go in again. And pull up that loop there, and then scooch that off the needle. So that is a knit below. And you don't want to make that particular stitch too tight because it does create a bit of a tension on your piece, hence the curling that does inevitably happen. Then knit the next stitch, and then knit in the stitch below. Again, going in underneath there. Pull up that loop and off. Then knit, and then knit below, and then knit, and then knit below, and knit, and knit below. So if you just look at it as far as that sort of horizontal bar and going below that, that is what I found helps. Now this is the first time in which I've tried to use this technique of knitting in the stitch below, and it did take me a little bit to get used to it, but after a couple of rows, I'm like, oh, you know, I can do this. And then knit the next stitch, and then knit below. There we go. And then knitting the last stitch. Okay. Voila. All right. And then, you know what, we'll do this on camera. Row 3, just knit your way back across. So this row right now, it's going to be the back side or the wrong side of our piece. So just knit your way across, not a big deal. And the neat thing is that it kind of simulates a variation of the seed stitch. And if you're not a fan of doing purl stitches, it will give you sort of the texture of the seed stitch, but no purls necessary. Go. Just a couple more. And then we will do the next row. Okay, just 2 more. And there you go. So that is row 3. Now, obviously, it does not look like much at the moment. Don't worry, we will get there. Okay, so row 4, very, very, very similar to row 2. Row 2, we knit a stitch and then we knit below on the second stitch. For row 4, well, we're going to offset that, which means instead of knitting just the first stitch, we're going to knit the first 2 stitches. That's 1 and 2. And then we start in with the alternating back and forth. And so after knitting the first 2, going to then knit below, there we are, and then knit, and knit below, and knit, knit below, and knit, knit below, and knit, knit below, And then when you have 2 stitches left, just knit those last 2 stitches. And there you go. And then, of course, since that is the end of our 4 rows, row 1 is quite simply just knit your way back across. Very, very, very simple like that. And I have come up with a bit of a trick as far as figuring out, like, if you are not a fan of keeping notes, are you on a row 2 or a row 4? Yeah, that can be a little bit frustrating and a little bit daunting as far as, like trying to remember, keep track of which row you're currently on. And that is why I'm always very keen to examine the work, try to read the stitches, and be able to determine where I'm at without having to utilize the pattern or a row counter. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a trick that I have figured out. Okay, so let us proceed with a repeat, shall we? Okay. Okay, so we're going to repeat row 2, and the trick that I figured out is the whole thing is sort of offset. Let me get my original example here. And it doesn't seem, very obvious offhand, but if you look at the work on the edge here, it looks like you have sort of like a little bit of a garter stitch rib going on here. These 2 stitches right here, and then sort of a V, if you will. And there's another 2-stitch ridge here, and another 2-stitch ridge here, and another one down here. That is the trick. Finding those little ridges on the edge there, that totally helps. And if you look at the piece that we are currently working on, if you look closely, you can see right here is that 2-stitch garter stitch ridge right there. And then in between, you can see the sort of V stitches in between. And then there's another sort of little ridge right there, and then another V, and then another ridge. The V, that is the stitch below, okay? Now, so if you have a ridge right here, you're going to want a V on top of it, okay? So, and then you would want a ridge over here, which means that you would knit the first stitch, then do a knit below, and then knit the next stitch, okay? This will become more apparent as you go further on, but since this is row 2, yes, we are going to knit the first, and then knit below. And it's always that first one that you do is more tricky. Once you have more fabric established, it's a lot easier to find those stitches and get in there. And then knit, and then knit below, and knit, knit below, below, knit, knit below, knit, knit below, and knit the last stitch. And then, yeah, row 3, just going to knit my way back across. And then we can do the repeat for row 4. So all in all, it is pretty easy. And yeah, when you look closely at your stitches, and if you can read the stitches, it makes a lot more sense and makes it a lot easier to figure out what exactly is it that I have to do. Now, I would suggest perhaps using what I refer to as sort of a clean yarn, one that has a distinct twist to it, like this. Something with a lot more foof and fuzz and texture might not be conducive if you want to be able to read your stitches. Also, I do like the definition of the bee stitch with this kind of a yarn. As far as what sort of color or colorway to use, hey, I say have fun with it. Okay, so we got that going on there. And then for row 4, now again, going to examine our stitches here. So as you can see, you know, down here is where we have that sort of double of our ridge stitch, okay? And then in between, you can see it's like this one little itty-bitty ridge here, and then the V-stitch. So we're going to want to have the next ridge on that third stitch, because you want to cover over this V here. So it's going to be knitting 2, then going to be doing the one below. And that's what's going to create that stagger. So let's do that together, shall we? So knit the first 2. And then knit below. And knit. And knit below. And knit. Knit below. Knit. Below. Knit. Below. And when you have 2 stitches left, knit those last 2 stitches. And there you go. And then, of course, you would knit your way back across and proceed to do your patterning. Now, when it is time for you to bind off, this is my own personal suggestion. Wait until you are ready to do your row where it's just knitting across, whether it's a row 1 or a row 3 on the just plain knitting row, that is the row that I would suggest to do your bind off because it's not a patterned row. And you know what? I think I'm going to show you my my rendition of a stretchy bind off. You know, to each their own, but you know what? Let's do that together, shall we? Okay, so the bind off that I generally like to use is what I call a stretchy bind off. Going to show you that right now, since we don't have that many stitches. So for that, knit the first 2 stitches. And the reason why I do this is because I have a tendency of casting off a little too tightly for my own good, so I like this bind off. So knit these first 2 stitches, then with the left needle going in through the front of those 2 stitches, and then knit them together and off. There we go, I got it. Knit together and off. Then knit the next stitch, and then through the front of those 2 stitches, knit them together and off, and so on and so forth for the rest of the stitches until you reach the very end. As far as what I was saying before regarding being able to read the work, it makes sense to me, but it may not make sense to some of you. That's totally fine. If you want to keep track, keep notes as far as what row you're on, by all means, do whatever works for you. I've found, you know, little things and tips and tricks and things that work for me. And they may not work for you. That's okay. But I figure if I've come up with something that makes sense for me, it might make sense for you, and I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't tell you about them. So ultimately, do whatever works best for you. Same thing with the binding off. You know, this is my preferred method, and I will put a link to the video that I did on this particular bind off. I'm losing my voice here, excuse me. So if you want a more in-depth look at this particular bind-off, you can check that out as well. I think that this would make a great overall stitch for a baby blanket or a cowl. It is kind of two-sided. I mean, it doesn't look the same on both sides, but I think it looks nice on either side. So I think, yes, it could legitimately make a very nice scarf. But you might, like I said, you might want to do a border. But, you know, hey, dealer's choice, right? Okay, just a couple more to go, and then we shall be done. There we go. I always get very fidgety with the bind-offs because I don't like messing it up. There we go. Okay, just a couple more. Also, I'm not used to working with bamboo needles, but for the tutorials, it is, I find, a lot easier working with DPNs because I don't have to deal with a circular knitting needle cord getting in the way of my camera, for those of you that might have been wondering. Okay, there we go. And one more, and then we're good. Okay, and then through these two. And voila. Then pulling out this loop, cutting the yarn, etc. And then on the front side, we have the lovely bee stitch. And yeah, that's really all there is to it. So you got these lovely little bees in flight. So pretty. Absolutely love it. And I hope that you guys enjoyed this tutorial as well. And if you did, please give a little thumbs up button down below. You know that I appreciate your appreciation. I always get tongue-tied at the end of the videos, all this talking. But yeah, I really enjoy showing you guys new stitches, new techniques that you can give a whirl. And if you are going to give this stitch a try, what are you going to make with it? What sort of project, what sort of yarns? Always curious about your own particular yarny adventures. Yes, let me know in the comments section down below. And you know what to do until next time, right? I want all of you to stay inspired, stay caffeinated, stay stitching, and please stay safe. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I will see you in my next video. Bye for now, everybody, and have a great, great day.